This is the portion of our program where we have a community moment, which is an opportunity for anyone in our community to get up and give a talk on any topic of their choosing. It can be a hobby or a subject that you're passionate about, or a story of your journey to free thought. Really, the subjects are limitless. The only condition is that it needs to be 10 minutes or less. This morning, Grant McCracken will be speaking to us on the history of comics.
Awesome. So, in this present moment of global warming, the rise of authoritarianism, our government's ongoing series of crises, I think that distraction can be self-care. And I don't know about y'all, but I've needed a lot of self-care. So, I'm going to talk about comic books. So, why comic books? Well, I was an English major, so I like to analyze the things that I read. I think comic books can reflect their time in history as well as the kind of cultural conversation that was going on then. So you can see here a 1941 cover of Daredevil versus Hitler next to the 2012 the first gay wedding in a comic, which is Archie. So through comics, you can see both the conversation and the events that shaped those shifting values. So comic books are kind of loosely referred to in ages, so I'll use that framework as I'm discussing this going forward. So in the beginning, which is also called the Platinum Age, you can see up here a comic or cartoon by Thomas Nast from 1870. He used these comics to kind of rebuke a politician, a corrupt Democratic politician from New York named Boss Tweed. He actually did end up taking him down with these comics. Next to that is The Yellow Kid from McFadden's Flats from 1897. This is the first comic book ever produced, which is also kind of interesting because you can see the text box is actually his shirt. And then next to that is the very, very popular at the time crime comics. This one is Slam Bradley from 1937. The art style used to draw Slam would then go on to influence Superman. So the Golden Age, which falls roughly between 1938 and 1956, saw a huge increase in readership for comics. And like all of these are still staples in our culture today. So you can see Superman from 1938 and Wonder Woman next to that, who premiered in 1942. So a lot of this style was also very influenced by it was the training films division in the Army. That included people like Stan Lee, and Dr. Seuss was also a part of that. The people in that group ended up having huge influence. Also, Batman, who premiered in the Detective Comics, started in 1940. Also, the author for Wonder Woman is a really interesting human being, helped to invent the lie detector, as well as the DISC personality test that is still used, though maybe a little questionable. So, going into the Silver Age, there were a lot of changes, and that was motivated by this gentleman right here, Frederick Wortham, and his book, The Seduction of the Innocent. This fell into the Red Scare era, and he asserted that comic books were corrupting the youth. His assertions were that Superman represented fascist ideals, Batman and Robin promoted a homosexual lifestyle, and Wonder Woman was a lesbian with a bondage fixation. I mean, you can, yeah, they're arguable, but so the outcome of this was the industry tried to self-regulate and produced a comic book code authority and the comic book code. In this, some tenets were in every instance good shall triumph over evil. If crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities, and vampires, vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited. boring. But so the comics of this age saw a lot of reboots. So there was Flash Gordon, who had gone away in the Golden Age, got brought back in 1956. There was also the Batman TV show with Adam West, which was campy but fun. But it was a more child-focused kind of period of time and reflected a lot of the conservative values that were popular. So that kind of ended up being nothing uncomfortable or challenging. Next up comes the Bronze Age, which is 1970 to 1985. It had been a period of time since the comic book code was made, and they started trying to press against that. So you can see here Spider-Man, his girlfriend in the comic, Gwen Stacy, died in one comic in 1973. Also at the same point in time, Captain America's sidekick, Speedy, got addicted to heroin, which was brought on by Nixon's war on drugs. And then Iron Man later would battle with his own alcoholism, which kind of came into the public spectrum because of Betty Ford. Also during that same point in time, because of civil rights, you started seeing more minority heroes. So Black Panther, who I think first started in, or first appeared in Fantastic Four, got his own comic in 1977. Also, X-Men started doing a lot more themes on oppression and otherness. And then, kind of lastly, going into the next age of comics, Alan Moore took over the Swamp Thing from previous authors in 1982. In that he switched the narrative from a man that had been transformed into a monster that believed he was a man. That opened up a conversation about what it meant to be human, and a lot more kind of deep themes and undertones in that comic. So the next age, being 1985 through 1996, also roughly coinciding with grunge, is the Dark Age, which saw comics like Sandman in 1989, written by Neil Gaiman. The main character in that story is Morpheus, the god of dreams, and since he's the god of dreams, then he's also the god of stories, which makes the whole comic into a story about stories. If I'm showing my bias a little bit, I love that comic. Next came Watchmen, also made by Alan Moore in 1986, which started a trope that is probably very familiar now of self-aware and very human and deeply flawed superheroes. Umbrella Academy just came out, but this was the first time that was done. And then following that is Mouse, that was produced in 1991, in which it was the Holocaust story, but in that the mice were Jews and the cats were the Nazis. But it was a historical story with a lot of weight to it, but being told through a new medium. So after 1996 comes the modern age. And comics are probably more alive and well than they ever have been. Here you see The Walking Dead, which has been a TV series for way too long. Saga. That being said, the first issue of Walking Dead just sold, or most recently sold, for about $20,000. Saga, which if you are a fan of any of the things that I've been talking about and have not read it, I would highly recommend it. And then following that, Why the Last Man, which has just been picked up by FX and will be a TV show in the next year or two. In that the main character is the last man in existence in a world full of women. So the comic has a lot of themes of gender and power dynamics. I think comics are usually a lowbrow medium, but in that you can see so much of our shared history and culture. I think comics for me is kind of a fun and light hobby, but in digging into it, you can kind of see how it connects to so much of our history. And nothing's made in isolation if you dig into any art form, whether it's pop music or art or, architecture. Everything influences everything. And getting into that can give you a grain of salt when it comes to, the sensationalism of modern news, or, sometimes it can just be fun to turn your brain off and read a comic every now and then. Thank you.